I respect the office of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That's my opening pitch with this one because I think that it's kind of become vogue of late for people to disparage former premiers making their views known or doing interviews and so on. And I think there's a few reasons for this. Firstly, pretty much every living British Prime Minister has some controversies, some more so than others, but by the very nature of high political office, that sort of job, same with former American presidents, is always going to be polarizing. Um, so, if you see David Cameron giving an interview or Tony Blair giving an interview or a perspective or an opinion on something, um, and the other premiers, people, unfortunately, like I've just said, David Cameron giving an interview with Christian Amanpour. I think the issues he was discussing was climate change. Part of it was apparently a little jibe at Trump's plan to come back. But, you know, so much cynicism in those responses, like, oh, who cares what Dave thinks? Or, why does it matter, etc., etc. I take an unpopular position with this. I say that because I don't think I'm in the majority with this one, but I have to say what I think is true. Um, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, when they were in office, they were working with other world leaders. They were working with business people. They were working with the top mechanisms of government, with institutions, all at the highest level, national security, international affairs. These are people who um, had a place in history, whether a big place or a relatively small place. They had experience, and it is the most powerful position in the country. The Queen is the head of state, but as head of government, the Prime Minister is essentially leader of the country. So when people say that their opinion is invalid, I'm thinking, why? Just because they're out of office, their opinion suddenly has no weight? I mean, consider contemporary leaders who often would consult their predecessors. Maybe not often, but it's on both sides of the Atlantic that happens, regardless of politics, because the loneliness of that position is such that only a former prime minister or a former president can understand the weight of it. Um, I would even say, any senior minister's opinion would be valid. A former foreign secretary, a former chancellor. This idea that their opinion isn't valid just because they're not in office is absurd. That's not to say their opinion is correct. I'm not saying that, oh, well, Tony Blair said that must be true. I think people look at the failures of their premierships or the controversies of their premierships as a way of disparaging the view. But, it's not about whether you like them or not, or agree with them or not, or even if they're right or not. It's about the experience that they had. Um, I think that counts for something. So, my response when it's like John Major had said this about this issue, Gordon Brown has said that about that issue, I figured, okay, well, let's see what they have to say. And they might be right and they might be wrong. This is especially true with Brexit. Both Blair and Major have voiced skepticism of that. Well, they have a right to an opinion. That's another point about this. Politicians, former prime ministers, have a right to their opinion. You might not like that opinion, but they have a right to an opinion. Um, and so that's the stance that I take. Now I understand that there might be situations where they take a particular position that's very controversial, and maybe there might be cynicism around that because perhaps they left office for that very reason. Um, so, for example, if Cameron was to offer an opinion on Brexit, and so far he's been quite reluctant to do so, people would say, "Oh, well, you were the guy that called the referendum." So actually, he polarizes both sides because the Brexiteers see him as a Remainer who kind of thought he would win, and Remainers see him as the guy who brought all of this about. So, he can't win in a sense. My own thought is the referendums that Cameron called, he was the Prime Minister who presided over two very controversial referendums, Scotland and Brexit. How much of that is his fault? Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly there was internal party mechanisms in which Cameron had promised a referendum on the EU, and it would have been kind of political suicide not to have done so. That needs to be understood. As with Scotland, should that referendum have been called in 2014? Well, if it wasn't, the nationalists would have said that their views were being deprived, and that probably would have galvanized support. I definitely don't think there should be another referendum for a generation. I'm 100% behind Boris Johnson on that because, it's only been 7 years. Are we going to have a referendum every time there's a change in opinion polling, which, is not necessarily consistent? No. Also, the Nationals have not respected the results of 2014. When I've raised that point, they laugh, their little smiley emojis and so on. But it's the truth, they haven't respected it. So I don't think the Prime Minister should take any lectures from the SNP about democratic mandate, as they haven't respected the democratic mandate of the majority of Scots who voted to stay in the Union. I will say this, so the SNP seem to be having a bit of their own civil war going on now, so, you know, for unionists that might be a good thing because they'll be distracted from pushing the their agenda, which is to break up the UK. Um, but summed up, I just think it's absurd that people think that former prime ministers can't have an opinion. It's not about whether they're right or wrong. It's not about whether you agree with them or not. The point is they have experience. Um, experts might be misplaced, but put it this way, if you want some art reviewed and you want someone in the business to, for want of a better term, to review the art, let's say you had an artist who was maybe no longer active, but they had a big insight into, what the world of art looks at and so on, surely their opinion would be valid. Surely, a young boxer would respect the opinion of a retired older fighter. Um, so John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, their opinions count, whether you like them or not. They were former prime ministers of the United Kingdom. One of the most powerful positions, frankly, in the world. Certainly in the top 20 most powerful positions in the world. So it's something that I don't think people should dismiss. But that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching.